Hello, and welcome to another episode of Teaching with Madly Learning. With school this year being so completely different, there are so many teachers who have been unexpectedly, or expectedly in some cases, switched to teaching virtually. Now, I will be completely honest and transparent. I am not currently a virtual teacher, and I am not an expert on your specific districts or school boards' expectations for virtual teachers. I have, however, surveyed a group of teachers who are teaching virtually and asked them for samples of what their expectations are as a virtual teacher. I wanted to take this opportunity to take what I would traditionally present as an option for what an in-person, in-classroom teacher would do for their literacy block and present it through what types of activities could be done asynchronous, what types of activities could be done in synchronous learning, how to structure your small group instruction, as well as how to plan for what activities are done completely independently. If you are new to the show, thank you so much for joining us. My name is Patty, and I am a junior grade teacher here in Ontario, Canada, and I am also the teacher author behind madlylearning.com. Every Monday night, there is a new video that we put out at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And through these videos, it's my hope that we can help teachers in the junior grades to implement more inquiry-based instruction, use differentiated teaching strategies, deal with split grade teaching issues that may occur, and spiral their instruction in a way that can fit everything together to make teaching and learning in your classroom simple, straightforward, and stress-free. So again, we're going to be talking about teaching in virtual classrooms. So first, in your virtual learning classroom, just like in our in-person classroom, there's a lot of various components that are required and included in what it is we're supposed to teach. And our job right now is to try to figure out how we can present these when we're not in class in person. So if you think about all of the things that you need to do in a regular language program, you'd have a read aloud, your shared writing, media lessons, shared reading, listening, student-teacher conferences, spelling and grammar, feedback opportunities. You want your students to be writing daily, speaking, guided reading, independent reading. And in a virtual classroom, you're going to have synchronous learning. It seems to be that everywhere now, if you're teaching virtually, expects some level of synchronous instruction where you are live on camera with your students. There's also going to be times where students are going to be doing some asynchronous learning, where you will have some videos or pre-recorded activities for your students to learn at their own pace. There will also be an opportunity for small group instruction, and I would encourage small group instruction. One thing I found when I was teaching my students between March and June was that small group instruction was definitely a way to get instruction to my students in a really effective and timely manner. Because I had a small group and I didn't have to manage the behavior of the 20 other students while I worked with a small group of 5 or 6 students, it did allow me to focus my entire attention on those 6 students at a time, which if all of my attention is on them, whereas in a classroom, typically maybe only 50% of my attention is on the students in front of me in a guided session because I'm still managing the classroom, then virtual small group instruction gives you a lot of bang for your buck. And because you're going to have some small group instruction, it also means that you're going to have some independent tasks that the students who are not within that small group at that moment will be engaged in while you are not meeting with them. So we still want to look at this model as that there still seems to be, and the teachers that have reached out to me and shared what their expectations are, that there still seems to be an expectation that in your instructional day, 100 minutes should be dedicated to language instruction. So if that is your time frame, then, and depending on whatever hourly or minute-based limitations or expectations you might be given, I've put them here in percentages. Now, asynchronous and synchronous instruction, your district may give you different percentages. This is my proposed plan, and the balance between both of these can be determined by the teacher as well as by the expectations from your district or school board. So between asynchronous and synchronous learning, this should take about 40% of your entire language time. Students should be engaged in a lesson or an activity during 40% of their time. That's very similar to what would happen in class as well, is that 40% of their time is with teacher instruction or even instruction on their own. Remember, it's really difficult to simply just give students an activity without giving them some form of instruction as well. Now, the other half of your literacy time should look for small group and independent type work. Now, you'll notice that 40% and 40% are not going to be equaling 100%. And that's because I do think that there should be a separate component of office hours where you can do some one-on-one conferencing as needed with students, and that would be about another 20% of your time. 20% of your office hour time can be dedicated for individual conferencing and opportunities for feedback or impromptu groupings if you need to. But I wanted to leave virtual teachers some wiggle room here so that you can move different activities that you might do one-on-one or those conversations you might have. Those will most likely not be happening during this portion, but could be happening during, say, an office hours. And I'll touch back on that in a couple of slides. So if you're doing 40% synchronous, asynchronous teacher-led instruction, and then you have small group instruction and independent work activities for your students, what are some of the things that you could do during a day? So if you're going to structure your day, this is my proposal for how you could possibly structure each of your language blocks in your virtual classroom. I would begin each day with an asynchronous lesson. This allows you with your language to compile and address some things that you might need to one-on-one or individually answer some emails and responses. Asynchronous lessons, start them off with that. And it also means that if you can get them to do some pre-work, because the next activity is going to be your whole group synchronous instruction. So if there is a video on YouTube that you would like to highlight or have them watch, it's a great opportunity for you to have them do that first and then follow up with the teacher-directed synchronous learning, with the expectation that your students would independently watch that video and then come to you for the lesson. And that asynchronous lesson, that video could be made by you, but it can also be made by someone else. And there is a plethora of teacher instructional videos and tutorial videos made by other teachers across North America, across the world. As many teachers have gone virtual, there's a lot of lessons that are accessible on YouTube. So by using other people's resources, you can do that as well. So again, start with that asynchronous getting started. This is a very flipped model classroom here, and then get into your whole group synchronous instruction. Once that is done, then you really have two components here. Is after your whole group, it's time for you to move on to your two small group instructions. Now, in many of the suggested timelines that I've been seeing from other boards, you would have two small groups, about 20 minutes each, while the rest of your class is working on independent tasks. And we're going to get into what exactly are the different tasks and lessons that would fit into these components in just a bit. And then again, I would finish up again with some consolidation, whole group synchronous learning once again, where you are bringing it back around, teaching another mini lesson perhaps, and getting some things that you wanted to touch base with, or you wanted to kind of use some consolidation time. That's a great time to do it. So it's kind of like a whole group sandwich. You start with the whole group, you move into some smaller breakout groups while the other students are working on independent learning, and then you bring them all back together and wrap everything up. Now, again, I would anticipate that this would count about 80 out of your 100 minutes. And then the other portion of that language can be within, say, office hours. But if you wanted to have specific office hours that were just for your students, for language specifically, perhaps you have someone else teaching other subjects or you're just teaching language, then I would probably fit in those office hours right before the last whole group. So I would finish up with this whole group synchronous. And if you wanted to throw in an extra 20 minutes of office hours, I would do that after your small group instruction, before your final whole group synchronous learning. Now let's look at the different activities that could fall under asynchronous and synchronous type learning. So, sample asynchronous type learning activities are grammar, spelling, and vocabulary. There is so many YouTube videos and tutorials and lessons that are already pre-created on pretty much any spelling, grammar, and vocabulary lesson that is out there. So utilize those resources and use a flipped classroom model where you would have them watch the video during that asynchronous time on the spelling and grammar lesson for the week or your theme for the week. So if you're using Ignited Literacy, there's always a grammar or spelling focus that is incorporated into each and every week. You can find a video on YouTube that goes over those concepts and plug it into your asynchronous learning at the beginning of your lesson for the day. Then you can, for your synchronous type of learning, you can focus on the writing process. You could do your mentor paragraph activity during that time. You could focus on some grammar work where it's more interactive with your students in synchronous. So they learn about the rule in the asynchronous, and then they practice almost in a shared writing or shared grammar activity in your synchronous learning. I also think asynchronous can be a read aloud. There are, again, most of the books, if not all of the books in my Ignited Literacy program, have a YouTube component, and publishers have opened up their permissions to allow teachers to publish YouTube videos of their books being read for school purposes. So because of that, you could read a book and post it on YouTube and share it with others as well. So for that reason, having students do an asynchronous read aloud, you can present that video to them and have them watch the video, and you can even give them some comprehension questions to follow along with, such as the questions you would typically use in the read alouds guides using Think Alouds or modeled thinking and questioning strategies. Well, you would typically read those books to your students in class. Those, pick a few of those questions and they can be presented to your students as listening guides or questions they can be thinking about as they're listening to the story. So once you've done the read aloud, another component that you can include in asynchronous learning would be using a YouTube video or lesson. Maybe it's a reading or something that reviews pieces of the writing process or even a writing form, and allowing your students again to watch the video first. So getting some pre-teaching before they come to you in a whole group lesson will help to speed along that whole group lesson so that you're not starting from scratch. They have some background knowledge that you can then do an activity with in your synchronous learning. So that's why I put the asynchronous at the front, to give them some background knowledge first, and then they come and see you and you build on that, and then they go ahead and do their independent activity as well. And finally, something they can do asynchronous, again, is spelling and grammar activities, especially if they're conducting a spelling test. This is something that they can do on their own with their family. Their family can interact with them and do a spelling and grammar. They can also get on a conversation with someone else in your classroom, and they can quiz each other for spelling and grammar. But that is something that they don't need to be live for in order to do as well. You could also, if it is, you could record that. Now, this is just for their practice. I still wouldn't necessarily be assessing any spelling and grammar tests at this point. If they're doing it asynchronously, I would be judging their use of the words within their writing. So are they applying the knowledge and skills of spelling and grammar in their actual pieces of writing? Now, if you're looking at the synchronous process, this is going to be after they've had that introduction piece. So after they've had that pre-primed asynchronous video, now you're going to get into some whole group instructional models with your students where you are going to be leading the discussion, or whether you're doing modeled, shared, or even whole group guided type of activities. You're going to be doing that in your live synchronous lessons, either at the beginning or at the end, as in my proposal. So some of the activities that you can be doing during the synchronous are going to be the writing process. Sharing writing process, writing form, doing shared writing activities with your students, going over specific concepts. Modeled writing is a great one to do here, shared writing as well. Looking at examples, exemplars, having conversations with your students where you really need to kind of feed off of them for those lessons. Those are going to be the great lessons that you're going to want to do live with your students, where you can build on some of the perhaps asynchronous material that they have watched to prep them, and that you can really have those live interactive conversations where you can build and they can share some of their knowledge here. It's also a great opportunity to do shared reading. Because you're really going to dig into the text, your students can have the copy of the text in front of them. They can see you annotate a text live, so you can share it on your screen. You could have it under, say, a document camera if that's something accessible to you for your virtual classroom. But you can annotate it right there live and in person, have conversations, and talk about it as well. Now, these are going to be key activities that you could do in synchronous, because really the activities you're focusing in synchronous instruction are going to be your interactive lessons. They're not going to be the ones where it's just teacher talking the whole time, because those can often be turned into videos and can be watched asynchronous. Or instead of you constantly making the video, you can find somebody else who's made a video. So if you think you've got a whole week's worth of lessons, see if there are 2 videos a week, 2 asynchronous videos a week that you could make, and find 3 asynchronous videos for your students from somebody else to watch. And if you're posting them and making them available, then this is something that is helpful. I would be less worried about putting your video up on YouTube and sharing it. You can have a video that does not show your face, where it's just your hands on a screen. It could simply just be you filming something on Educreations. If you go on the Madly Learning YouTube channel and you scroll all the way down to the bottom, not through these videos, but you'll see some previous videos that I've put up for my own class where it's simply me talking over, me writing on my iPad. Now, that's an asynchronous type of video that you could create for math or language that you could provide your students, where the only thing that's exposed for you personally is your voice. Now, the other component of your virtual classroom is going to be our centers activities, which we're very used to using in a classroom. I'm a big proponent of centers activities in your language classroom. And then you have your small group instruction with your students, your guided reading, as well as your student teacher conferences. First, I want to dispel a myth that centers are not allowed in COVID times in teaching, or even that centers activities are impossible when we're doing virtual learning, or that you have to have some sort of complicated rotational system made available. I want you to reframe how you are looking at centers in light of the current teaching situation. Instead of thinking of centers as places that students go to complete a task, or they have a task to complete on one day and another task, and you control that. Instead, I want you to start thinking about centers as a to-do list. A to-do list that maybe you assign that every Monday, this is the to-do. Every Wednesday, we do this. Every Friday, we do this. In a independent task where you take your centers activities and you now turn them into independent virtual tasks to do during that independent time while you are working with small groups, that students can simply look at their centers activities as a to-do list. Now, this is also the open flexible model when you're using centers in your classroom where students can work through the centers at their own pace and at their own timing, so at their own interval as well. So you're just transferring this into independent work time for your virtual students. It means that they have 3 tasks to complete. So if you're following my Ignited Literacy program, the 3 tasks that I typically will use in centers is writer's workshop, spelling and grammar, and read and respond. Now, no, I would not use this rotational system behind me in my virtual classroom. I would not assign different groups to do different things at different days. I would simply just present it in a list, and I may, for accountability purposes, have students using Google Jamboard to identify where they are so I can have a snapshot of the class and they can tell me what they're working on as they move through their to-do list. But I wouldn't necessarily have a complicated rotational schedule because it's just a lot of management for you as the virtual teacher. Instead, I would simply list the activities that they have to do. I would be trying here to minimize the amount of digital activity that they would have to be completing. So, for instance, writer's workshop is I want them to write something. I'm not going to provide them with anything at this point. I may provide them with story frameworks depending on age and ability level. I may provide them with, say, frameworks that they can choose to use, but I wouldn't be necessarily creating like a new digital slide for every week. I would simply want them just to start a new doc. The same thing I would expect in my classroom is the same thing I would expect in my virtual classroom. You're starting a new piece of writing, you go to Google Docs and you open up a new document and you start planning and you start writing. Spelling and grammar activities, you can design a spelling and grammar choice board that you provide your students, and it can be the same choice board each and every week so you don't have to recreate the wheel every single time. And students can do those activities on the materials that they have. So they decide whether they're going to do it on pencil and paper. They decide whether they're going to do it virtually, or they can just do it on pencil and paper and take a picture of it. They can be more interactive with it because they have more materials at home in which to do it with. But I would be providing them as the teacher this spelling choice board, and I would not be recreating all of these interactive activities that they would need to then log on and do. Because there's a part of me that knows that as a parent, I wouldn't want my own children to be, even though they're doing school virtually, wouldn't want them to be on the device all the time. I would want there to be some activities they could take offline and free up that device for perhaps another student. So I would want there to be some flexibility in there. And by deconstructing how I present that information, it would help those students to decide, do I do this on my device or do I still use pencil and paper to do this activity? And that might be okay as well. And even if it's pencil and paper, they can still submit that to you by scanning in those pages to you using things like Adobe Scan. Read and respond, again, they can do this by starting a doc. They don't need a fancy slide or a page to put this information on. They can simply just open up a new doc and share it with you. And whether they're using Microsoft or Google or some other platform, this can all be done offline or online depending on the student's needs and circumstances. And it's easy for me because if I'm for my Ignited Literacy friends, you can simply just put the choice boards up for your students and then they can choose their question and respond on a doc and hand it in when they're done. I really think it's important that we keep it super simple. I know I went a tad bit crazy in May and June creating all of these things, and it could have just been much simpler. Now, for your guided reading groups, once again, this would be the same thing I would do in class, except instead of my students sitting at my horseshoe table, they would be sitting on my computer screen in my little boxes. But I would still have them have access to a text. I would get them to be reading that text, asking them questions, sharing their ideas with others, and I would be listening to them read. But I do think it's important to be doing that guided reading and that guided instruction during these times, and it's the same type of task that we would be doing in class as well. Now, student-teacher conferences, I really am a big proponent of using those to work with students on their individual writing tasks. So the things they're working on in Writer's Workshop, I want to be able to conference with those students to talk about what it is that they've been writing, but I do want to do that one-to-one. And because I'm using one-to-one, I can use my office hours, which in most of the samples of virtual learning requirements that I have been sent, they've all had a component of what looks to be office hours, which are more flexible time where the teacher is online and available for students to pop in and answer questions. Well, this is also a great time that you can schedule these writing conferences one-on-one with students, where they come in, you have a conversation, and you share what they're doing. The other way to do this is to share your feedback through voice to text, or just through voice recordings. So you are able to use video recordings or voice recordings such as Loom, Screencast-O-Matic, and this is a great opportunity for you to quickly hit record on your computer, record some feedback for your students, and copy the link for them to watch the feedback video. My preference these days is actually Loom, Loom, because it's just quick and easy and free. So you click Loom, it records your screen, you automatically get a link that you can just simply drop and share into that page, and it will give you notifications when the person you sent the link to watched the video, which is very handy to know that the student actually watched your feedback video. But you can provide them feedback. If you don't want to do office hours, you can still provide them the same type of feedback from a student-teacher conference in a video format where it's just, again, your voice screen recording. So once again, this is how I propose your schedule for your virtual classroom for language arts. That we start with an introduction asynchronous lesson that is like a flipped learning, where students are going to learn something from a video, and then you will build on that during your whole group synchronous instruction. Then you will move into 2 small group sessions, while students who are not in your small groups will work independently on their centers tasks, and then you bring them back again for a consolidated lesson where you can address some of the issues that are happening with learning. You can reteach a concept, you can teach a new concept that they're going to then build on the next day's asynchronous learning and whole group instruction. But I think that this format will allow you to most often utilize the things that you would traditionally use within your resources in a virtual classroom without a lot of transferring and reinventing the wheel. Because again, it really is my hope to try to streamline and make this as simple as possible, even though it's not always as simple. So this is going to be different and it's going to be new, but we need to find efficiencies and ways that we can simplify how we present our virtual learning classroom without having to recreate absolutely everything that we present to our students. So it's my hope that through this video, it is giving you some food for thought or some ideas and a different perspective on how you could take the traditional activities that you would do in class and transfer those into your virtual classroom simply and easily. Thank you so much for joining me, and we will be back again next Monday night with another video on teaching with Madly Learning. Thanks so much. Bye for now.